What's up, everybody? Welcome to our third of our division previews. Today we got for you guys the Pacific Division, and this should be a good one. There was a lot of change here. We're going to start off here with the Anaheim Ducks. Now, this team did some really interesting stuff. I thought it was a little odd given their direction of their team. They went out and added guys like Alex Killorn from the Tampa Bay Lightning, guy who has been there his whole career. Paid him quite a bit of money, over $6 million, but I guess they wanted some veteran leadership for this young core.
Yeah, I didn't understand that contract at all. I thought they paid him a little bit too much money,
Yeah.
But I understand why they got a player like that. He's a veteran player that has won before, and he's going to be there in the locker room and try to teach guys like Trevor Zegras and young Zellweger and all these young guys coming up the system.
Yeah, no, and I think along with mentoring the young guys, we got to look at who they brought in for defense here. They added a lot of grit with these next two players, Radko Gudas and Haig. They're not necessarily going to contribute on the score sheet, but we saw what Gudas did, especially for the Panthers last year in that playoff run. This guy was up in people's face. He was hitting everything that moves. This guy's a really physical guy who can add a lot to this defensive core.
Yeah, Gudas is going to make the back ender much harder to play against. However, I don't think this with the direction this Anaheim Ducks team is currently, I just don't feel like they're going to win many games still. But I think Robert Haig is a very good two-way defenseman. He's a very good defender.
Yeah, I think they really did to complement guys that they're bringing along, especially the young kids like Olen Zellweger, who has a very good chance at cracking this lineup this year. I really look for him, even though he wasn't technically traded for, or he's going to be a new player to this team. And I think he's going to be a guy who has a real chance to contend for that power play one spot at some point this year. But we got to look at who they lost now. I mean, not a bunch of catastrophic losses here for this team, but they did lose Kevin Shattenkirk and Dmitry Kulikov, so clearly why we see them go out and get two new defensemen.
Yeah, not a big loss at all. Let's talk about their offense.
Yeah, let's look at this offense here first. Down the middle, you still got guys like Trevor Zegras. You still got Troy Terry on the wing there. Pretty good. Pretty young team, like Cohen said. Not necessarily the highest expectations for this year, but they're going to have some guys who are fun to watch.
Another player that we got to look out for is Mason McTavish being his second year, whether he's going to have a sophomore slump or whether he's going to progress and actually be better than last year. I thought he had a pretty good rookie season. He's physical. He's a young guy that can shoot and score goals. I like his game quite a bit, actually, for a young player. The other player I also want to see is whether Leo Carlsson might make this team. He's a second overall pick this draft pick. Good player so far, I think. With a lot of, it'll be nice. They have a nice future down the road for sure.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to see if Leo Carlsson makes this team. This team needed a really solid number 2 center here, and I don't know if he's going to make the team this year or next year, but it's definitely something to watch in this preseason. When it comes to a guy like Mason McTavish, like Owen said there, this guy had a pretty decent rookie year. He did pretty much exactly what I predicted him to be, 45, 50-point guy. He kind of came on a bit more near the end of the year, which is kind of expected for a rookie. I think he's going to be a guy who has really good potential to be a 30-goal scorer either this year or next year. So if he can do that, that really could help this team that has struggled to score goals.
Now, let's look at their defense core really quickly. We just mentioned the two guys that they added, Gudas and Robert Haig, which I thought were actually pretty good adds considering they needed more defensive demon on the back there and tougher, more grip back there. And I think they accomplished that by adding those two players. But a player I'll be really looking at this season is the development of Drysdale. This guy has been incredibly disappointing for me personally. I thought this guy when he was drafted, I had really high expectation for this kid. I thought this kid is going to light up the league in terms of point production. He hasn't reached that, not even close to that production. So I'm a little worried about this player. But they have other players, like Scott's going to mention, about this really young, exciting defenseman that's coming up their system.
Yeah, so just before I go on to this guy, who I think will probably be the future number 1 of this team, I'll talk a little bit more about Jamie Drysdale. Unfortunate situation last year with injury, pretty much missed the entire year. Really hurt his development a little bit because this guy was a very high first-round draft pick, and as well he was highly touted. He was supposed to be one of the next up-and-coming big defensemen. I still think he has a really good chance for that. We all know defense take time. But when it comes towards offensive production from the back end, I think we're really going to watch for Olin Zellweger this year. This is a guy who I expect to make this team. He's getting up there. He's like 20 years old now. He's no longer just like super young kid. He's kind of had some more experience now, and I think it's time. This team really is not shooting for the Stanley Cup in any way. They're trying to develop their young core players and try to make steps to get better and to become a future contender. And I think it starts with him on the back end.
Yeah, one guy I cannot forget is Cam Fowler. He's always been a very steady defenseman back there, and he's a proven player, and he's a good defenseman. So it's good to have him in the Anaheim lineup still.
Yeah, just looking at this defense in general, the best thing I can say about it is it's got a really good mix of young kids and veterans that you can kind of complement. So if you want to play a guy like Zellweger, you can have a guy maybe like Gudas beside him, backing him up, looking out for him a bit. And then same thing if you have Cam Fowler on one end, you can have Jamie Drysdale and kind of shelter him a bit too for the learning process. Looking at their goaltending, I mean, pretty much the same thing we've seen for a while. John Gibson's still here despite lots of trade requests to be moved. It's kind of wild. I thought for sure they would try to trade this guy and get the most they could right now. But it looks like as for now, until maybe halfway through the year, maybe the trade deadline, he'll be their starting goalie. And then Lucas Dostal as the backup. I really, really like this kid. I could see him being the future goalie for this team for a long time. He has showed some really good flashes of some really great play, especially on a team that did not have much in the way of stopping pucks last year.
Yeah, and don't forget they had a coaching change. They no longer have that coach anymore. And I did not like that coach because I've watched him coach in Edmonton quite a lot, and he wasn't very good. Dallas Eakins was not very good.
He's not great with young players.
So I think that we should expect to see the goalies improve under a new system, under the new coach.
Yeah, and I think player development for this team overall will improve as well with a new coach because Dallas Eakins, with the young players, the development never was there in Edmonton, and I just think that also didn't really help necessarily for the Ducks and their lack of structure.
And the next team that we have is the Calgary Flames. Now, this team didn't do a whole lot this summer. They went out and made a big trade. They traded away Tyler Toffoli for an added Sharangovich. I like Sharangovich. Sharangovich is a good defensive player. I think he's and sometimes he can chip in offensively. So we'll see how he does on this team.
Yeah, so that was the big move. One of the biggest moves of this offseason was the Tyler Toffoli trade. Unfortunately, that's going to hurt Calgary offensively quite a bit. I mean, this guy is proven 30-goal scorer. But bringing in a guy like Igor Sharangovich, he kind of showed flashes with the Devils several times to be a pretty successful player. He was used in a lot of situations, sometimes on the power play too, sometimes on the penalty kill, and just really good player. Lots of speed. He's had some great breakaway opportunities the last 2-3 years. Really nice young complement player for a Flames team that's looking to kind of retool a little bit.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he does on this team. But let's look at some of the losses. A good loss that they had was getting rid of Milan Lucic's contract. That was they were paying this guy about $5 million on, and that's $5 million off their books. So
everyone's happy about that.
Everyone's happy about that. And also depth players like Trevor Lewis and Michael Stone. And those guys actually played quite a bit on this team last year. So we'll see how this will impact the team going forward.
Yeah, I don't think it's catastrophic losses, but those are players that did chip in, especially like on the third line for guys like Trevor Lewis. I mean, you kind of knew what you were going to get from him day in, day out. But one thing I will say is this does open the door for a lot of younger players for the Flames, and I think the future is now in Calgary. I think they're start to bring up some of these guys from the AHL. Guys like Matthew Coronado is probably going to have a shot at the roster this year, as well as Connor Zary. And of course, can't forget Jacob Pelche, really good prospect, almost a surefire lock to make the Flames this year, probably even play in the top 6. So you know what? They did lose guys like Toffoli, but this is just an opportunity for these younger players to get into the lineup, in my opinion.
Yeah, now let's look at their offense. Starting off with their centers, they still have Elias Lindholm. There was a lot of trade rumors this summer, and he did not get moved, which is probably a good thing because I think Calgary Flames still think that they're a competitive team this year. And they wouldn't be competitive if they had to lose Elias Lindholm. So it's good that they still have him. And second line center obviously is still Nazem Kadri. It's not bad.
No, on paper it's a really good one too. I mean, obviously these guys struggled last year. Both of them kind of had regression years from their previous careers high the year before. Kind of expected for Kadri. I mean, like his career high year with Colorado was absolutely obscene. Like he just destroyed his previous best. So kind of expected him to come back down. Didn't expect him to come back down that hard though. I think this is a year that he's going to bounce back a little bit, be kind of closer to like a 75-point player potentially. And then obviously Elias Lindholm, what a beautiful player this guy is. This is a coach's dream. I mean, he contributes everywhere. I mean, this guy's nominated for like the Selke most years. Great two-way player, has scored 40 goals in the past. Like, I mean, what's not to love about this kid? And then when you look at the wingers, I mean, you're expecting a bounce back for Jonathan Huberdeau. I mean, for that kind of money, he better, and I think he will. He's not going to play that bad again. If you look at his last 5 years of his career, this guy has been a very, very dominant playmaker, a guy you can reliably assume is going to get 60 assists a year, and that's not crazy, even though it sounds absolutely incredibly high. I think he's going to have a really good bounce back year with Calgary.
Yeah, I also think Backlund's going to have a good season. I also think the Mangiapane is going to have a good season as well, mainly because of the new coach. They had changed their coach this summer. A lot of players did not like playing under Daryl Sutter in the last campaign.
Yeah,
so
it was no secret.
These guys, I think, are going to have a huge bounce back seasons playing under a new coach for sure.
Yeah, I think that'll make a big change, and I think the new coach is going to be more player-friendly for sure. I mean, it's not hard to beat Daryl Sutter for player-friendly, and these guys should have more freedom to roam and actually produce some offense, which will be especially good for some of the newer young kids like Matthew Coronado and Jacob Pelche. But moving on to their defense, we got to take a look here. Rasmus Andersson last year really impressed me a lot. This guy showed he had some really good offensive pop to his game that I didn't even know he had. I was quite shocked. Really impressed by that, along with Noah Hannafin. I mean, one of his best years I think he's had in the NHL, quite honestly. A really good two-way defenseman. He was such a high draft pick that never seemed to materialize, but he's starting to finally hit that good part of his prime, like 25, 26 years old, where he's starting to actually show.
And then the rest of their decor is also really, really deep. They got actually arguably the best defensive demon in the league in Mackenzie Weegar and Chris Tanev. Probably top 10 best defensive demon. So these two guys are really, really good. So we'll see how they do.
Yeah, so the Mackenzie Weegar trade, like once again, it just looked horrible last year for the Flames because Matthew Tkachuk left this team, absolutely went crazy, basically like a Hart Trophy type of season if it wasn't for a guy named Connor McDavid. But when Huberdeau played that bad and Weegar kind of had a step back last year, I fully expect Weegar to bounce back as well. We already know he's a great physical defenseman. He blocks shots, he hits. He's really good with the puck too, a really good playmaker. And I expect him to have a lot more points this year than he did last year as well, with the rest of this offense having more freedom. And then like as a good back-end power play guy that can actually move the puck up and start getting maybe like back to like 40 assists or something like that this year. And then when I look at a guy like Chris Tanev, I mean, this guy is the heart and soul of this team in a lot of ways. I mean, what he does defensively, he has no fear. He is so gritty. And when he's out of the lineup, the Flames are not themselves. So this guy just really contributes a lot. And I think he'll continue to do so on this team in a leadership role and as just a great defensive defenseman.
Yeah, that's a good point you brought up. A lot of people forget that Mackenzie Weegar had points, was a point production player.
Yeah, he was a
defenseman
highly producing
when
defenseman.
He was playing for Florida Panthers, and people forget that last year playing for Calgary. He had probably his worst season I've ever seen. I don't expect that from him again. Another player I really like is Sidorov. Big body guy who hits. Just another fan favorite in Calgary.
No, overall, this defensive core of 6 is pretty solid.
Yep.
And really not the problem for this team last year. Looking at their goaltending, this is where it gets interesting. 2 years ago, Jacob Markstrom was a finalist for the Vezina Trophy. He looked great. And Vladar as well looked like a really solid goalie. And then last year, holy smokes, these guys took a nosedive. This was the worst season last year I saw Markstrom ever play in the NHL. And Vladar was only slightly better, in my opinion. So these guys, more than anything, are going to have to step back and have a bounce-back season for this team to succeed and maybe make the playoffs.
I know they will, because there were some things that Daryl Sutter was doing that ruined the momentum of Jacob Markstrom. And I know Jacob Markstrom is going to be much happier playing for this new coach, and he's going to have a much better season.
Yeah, it really comes down to culture, and we're really expecting a new culture for this team, and for this team to really take a step forward after last year's step back. Next up, we have the Edmonton Oilers. Obviously, last year, the Oilers looked really dominant for especially the last 25 games of the season. They were pretty much nearly unbeatable until they ran into the playoffs against the Vegas Golden Knights. Looking at this offseason for this team, Edmonton really didn't do a ton. They did bring in Connor Brown, one of my old Washington Capitals there. Really interesting player. It's a good compliment for a winger. Guy adds a lot of grit, but he also has some scoring touch. So playing with a guy like potentially Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl for that matter, he's going to be a guy who could contribute 25, maybe 30 goals, more likely 25, and still be like a 50-point, 55-point guy. Really good physical player as well, so you never have to worry about him protecting your stars.
Yeah, let's look at some of their losses. They lost Klim Kostin and they lost Yamamoto. So these are two of the more notable ones. To be honest, the only one that kind of hurts is the Klim Kostin one. I think a lot of Oilers fans really like this player. He was a decent or pretty good fourth line player who scored some timely goals in the playoffs there. Yamamoto, I don't think that's a big loss at all. I thought we had to get rid of that contract, and he didn't really add anything to our top six.
Yeah, it was really wild watching Yamamoto last year. This guy had every opportunity to play inside the top six and play with Leon Draisaitl for most of the year. This guy had no excuse to not be like a 60, 65-point player, and instead he took a step backwards and was nowhere near as good. So I kind of see why they let him go. They were kind of looking to do so near the end of the year almost too, because this guy just wasn't contributing. Klim Kostin, I think, will hurt. It's not every day you can find a player who can play the fourth line, very physical, very positive player. Like, this guy's attitude was great there for the Oilers. I mean, you saw his interviews, and this guy was just very happy to be an Oiler. Unfortunately, I think what it came down to for the Oilers is they didn't have the money to pay his demands. Over $2 million for a fourth-line player is a little expensive in today's NHL, especially when you're paying McDavid and Draisaitl big money. So I think it was more of a cap casualty than anything.
Now let's look at the offense. Now they obviously have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. We don't need to really touch on these two. But the wingers, they got Evander Kane, and they got Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and they got Zach Hyman. The big question around this team, for me personally, is that this team had a record-breaking power play last year. They were shooting above the moon in terms of the power play. And I just don't see that happening again this year, even though they got these superstars on this team. I definitely see players like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Zach Hyman having a step back in terms of the production this year. But they're still going to be a very good team.
Yeah, so I think this offense is absolutely loaded. I'm not going to hide it. I'm by no means an Edmonton Oilers fan. I don't really like this team that much personally, but I got to respect this offense. It's one of the best top six out there. Absolutely dynamic, pretty much everywhere. I mean, when you got physical players like Connor Brown now, Zach Hyman, and Evander Kane as your wingers for your superstar players in McDavid and Draisaitl, you just got such a good mix. And then obviously Nuge had that career year last year, like 100 points was pretty wild and unexpected. I bet that Vegas odds for that were like 100 to 1. I don't think anyone saw that one coming. But I do think Cohen's right. I think we're going to see a little bit of a step back. The power play was the best ever last year, like in history of hockey. So it's pretty much guaranteed to be slightly worse at least. I do still think that they will have the league's best power play though.
With the Oilers, they've always struggled with their depth scoring. This year, we'll be looking at our third line led by Ryan McLeod and Warren Foegele. We'll see whether that line can actually spark anything offensively. I thought they did an okay job. I like Ryan McLeod's game overall in the playoffs, actually. But from point production point of view, I want them to have even more, obviously, to have success.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about, their offense is pretty stacked up at the top two lines. They will need some more timely goals from the bottom six. Going to look for some of their new players, guys like Lane Peterson, to fill a role that Kostin had where he was actually contributing offensively. I don't know if he'll be able to do that, but like Cohen said, McLeod, he showed signs of having flashes, and maybe potentially a guy like Raphael Lavoie will come up and add some scoring because that's what they drafted him to do as a winger. So we'll see. But we got to move on to the defense here. This defense is pretty much unchanged since the trade deadline departure of Tyson Barrie last year. But it's going to be led by Evan Bouchard offensively. This guy, I project him to have an absolutely massive offensive ceiling for a defenseman. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes the year top 5 in defenseman scoring. He's going to be the quarterback of this new power play that they're going to have. And he kind of showed in the playoffs. He was by far the highest point defenseman in the playoffs, and he didn't even make it to the Final Four.
Yeah, I expect Darnell Nurse to have a better year than last year. Defensively, I don't think he was very good last year, and a lot of fans were on him about it. They let him know for sure. Darnell Nurse needs to play better. He knows that. It's not just his $9.25 million. He knows that he's overpaid. A lot of fans here don't like his contract, but he actually needs to be a much better defenseman. His decision making needs to be better.
Well, let's talk about a guy who doesn't need to be a lot better because he was fantastic, and that was Matthias Ekholm, who they added at the trade deadline last year. This guy was absolutely a game changer for the Oilers. The second they acquired him, their team looked like a different team, and he just played absolutely unbelievable. They're going to need some guys like on their bottom pair to really step up, though. We need to see some more from Broberg. He was supposed to be a really high-end defenseman when they took him in the first round, top 10 overall a couple years ago. He really didn't look that great, I'm going to be honest. And Vincent Desharnais, for another guy in their bottom pair there, man, he got exposed more than I've seen a defenseman get exposed in the playoffs. This guy, I think he was on for like 35% of the goals. Like, it was wild.
Yeah, I actually see Vincent Desharnais have a big bounce back season. I think last year he just came into the league and he didn't know what to expect. He didn't realize how fast the game was, how little space there is in the NHL compared to the AHL. I think he's one of the older young players on our team.
Young guys.
Yeah, so I think now he knows what to expect, and I expect him to fully bounce back this season.
Yeah, now we got to look at the goalies here. This is where things get really interesting for me. Obviously, you got Jack Campbell, who got paid $5.5 million contract. I mean, big money for a goaltender and for a pretty good amount of term, too. He really didn't live up to it last year. He lost his starting job, and we saw Stuart Skinner take over and do a pretty good job. I mean, at least league average job. So that was pretty good for the Oilers' sake. I don't know really, honestly, who's going to start this year. Because when you're paying a goalie $5.5 million, and he kind of showed he was kind of getting it back by the time the playoffs were there, and kind of Stuart Skinner struggled in the second round of the playoffs pretty badly, and he got pulled like 3 times. So I really don't know who's starting here.
Yeah, I really don't know either. I have a good feeling it's going to be a split.
I do too. I think it's going to be chopped 50-50.
I think it's going to be chopped 50-50. I feel like Jack Campbell's going to have a redemption year. He's going to be motivated this year. And I actually thought he played pretty good in the playoffs there. I just thought it was a weird decision that Jay Woodcroft decided to leave Stuart Skinner in the net for most of the playoffs. I thought that was weird, but yeah.
Yeah, hopefully that didn't hurt the kid's confidence too bad because he kind of got torched. But yeah, 50-50 split. Probably ride the hot hand for streaks for like 2-week span. Maybe it'll be Campbell. Another 2 weeks it might be Skinner if they're really hot. You never know.
And the next team that we have is the Los Angeles Kings. Now, this team did really, really well in the last 2 years. They battled against the Oilers in the playoffs. They lost both times, but this team has showed a lot of promise. But this season, they made a big trade. They traded for Pierre-Luc Dubois, but they got rid of Gabe Vilardi. They lost Kupari, and they also lost Iafallo in the process in that trade. I just thought they gave up quite a lot of things for Pierre-Luc Dubois in this trade.
Yeah, it did seem like a bit, but I guess what the Kings are trying to do is they're trying to compete with the Edmonton Oilers. Let's be real, they've played them now twice in the playoffs in a row, and they've lost both times. I feel like they're trying to take that big move to take the next step. Dubois is a really good physical forward. I mean, like, you get a physical center like him who's close, if not a point per game. I mean, that's pretty powerful, and that really does round out their top 6 quite good. I think there was an ad that they needed to take a step forward because, I mean, they couldn't just wait. And they had a lot of young players waiting to come into the lineup with not a lot of space. So by doing this 3-for-1 trade like they did, I think this does open up room for some of these young kids like Byfield and Turcotte to get more playing time.
Yeah, those 2 players are going to be the guys that we'll be looking at really closely, is whether those guys, hopefully they don't, we just like how we're looking at Lafreniere and Pokako, those guys need to improve on the production on these teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to talk about a guy I didn't expect for this team to lose, though, and that was Sean Durzi. This guy, young defenseman for this team, not necessarily the best defenseman, but I thought they'd give him a little bit more time before shipping him off like that. Yeah. Went out to the Coyotes, really unexpected. But yeah, so they're going to have this hole be filled, and I think that's going to be by a new addition in Brant Clark. He's a draft pick that they had a couple years ago. This guy is absolutely stellar. I can't wait to watch him. I think he's going to be the future number 1 defenseman for this team. Really good offensive defenseman. Absolutely shattered numbers in the OHL last year. Probably going to be the power play quarterback before the year is over. Yeah,
now let's look further into their offensive depth. I think that their offense is pretty strong overall. They added Pierre-Luc Dubois, but they also have Andre Kopitar. They got my favorite player on the team is Adrian Kempe, who is just a hardworking player, fast skater, sniper, right?
Yeah, and I want to just quickly, like Owen said, down the middle, top 3 centers. I don't think there is a team in the NHL that has a better 1, 2, 3 centers for two-way hockey. Now, looking down, we got Anze Kopitar. This guy has been nominated in the past for the Selke. He's just so good on both ends of the ice, so reliable. You know what you're getting from him every year. Then Pierre-Luc Dubois, really physical center, a decent face-off taker. And then Philip Deneau, one of the best shutdown centers out there, and he's shown it in multiple playoff runs. I really think that they've built this team the right way, right up the middle.
Yeah, another player I really want to watch this season is Arthur Kaliev. I need him to improve his production. He hasn't been. I didn't think he'd break out.
He did have that injury last year.
Yep.
So after a good rookie year, I do think he's going to be one of those guys, along with Turcotte and Byfield, that will have to step up and fill these holes on this offense left by guys like Velarde and Iafallo. I think that's going to be really big for these guys to have a better, in this case, like third year for Kaliev.
Now let's look at their defense. They're starting with Drew Doughty. They have Drew Doughty, who's still their number one, but as Scott alluded to earlier, they have a new number one guy that will probably take over the franchise eventually, and that's Brian Clark, who's a terrific young player. I'm excited to see this guy play. Obviously, they have a very good defensive D-man in Mikey Anderson. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see this defense core, how they do this year.
Yeah, Mikey Anderson, we got to give him some credit for how well he did, especially in that series against the Oilers. He did a really good job dealing with guys like McDavid and Draisaitl, like as good as you can do. I mean, those guys are going to score no matter what. But I thought he played really well in that series. As well as Gavrikov. What an add that was for this team. That really rounded out a really solid top four defensive core for the Kings, and I think that he's going to continue to be a very big point of this defense and play a lot of minutes. For a guy like Brant Clark, I think they're going to try to ease him in a little bit. I think he's going to have a really good rookie season for a defenseman, but keep in mind rookie defensemen don't tend to have absolutely insane seasons. I don't expect for him to have 60 points as a rookie D-man, but I wouldn't be surprised if he contributed 18, 19 minutes a game and got maybe 35, 40 points.
Yep. Now let's look at the goaltending really quick. Now they added Cam Talbot, which is Tom McLellan's old goaltender when he was coaching the Oilers there. Now Cam Talbot is a good goalie, but now he's much older than when he got him those years in 2015, 2016. So it's going to be interesting to see how Cam Talbot plays being the number one goalie on this team, because they lost Korpisalo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Korpisalo did leave to Ottawa there. I don't necessarily know if Talbot will be the number one goalie on this team. Phoenix Copley last year, when he went to the Kings, he had an absolutely insane stretch. It felt like he won almost every game for this team. He kind of lost his job near the end of the year to Korpisalo and didn't really get to play in the playoffs that much. But I think we're going to see pretty close to, like we said with the Oilers, almost a timeshare here. The Kings did it last year. They were splitting goalies down the stretch with Korpisalo and Copley, nonstop, pretty much dead even. And I think that's going to happen with Talbot and Copley this year. I do think Copley being a little younger is going to help his case. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw 50 games for one and then 32 for the other. Next up, we have the San Jose Sharks. And man, did these guys get active, and one of the surprising active teams. This is a team that's been at the bottom of the league for the last couple years now. They went out and they just kind of added a bit of leftovers from everyone's team. They got Mike Hoffman, Philip Zadina, Anthony Duclair on offense, a big change, along with Mikhail Granlund. It feels like they just, I don't want to say sloppy seconds, but they went out there and got a lot of players that teams were just trying to get rid of. In the case of guys like Philip Zadina, I think it was a great swing. You risk nothing for a guy who was a former 6th overall pick, who could turn out to be a really solid offensive player for you, given the right situation, and I hope they do give him more time.
Yeah, I just thought it's pretty funny when you say sloppy seconds, because it's true. But the funny thing is that I feel like these sloppy seconds are going to improve this team actually quite a bit. I feel like this team just lacked a lot of depth everywhere, and now that they add Duclair, who can score goals, I've seen him score good goals in Florida and Ottawa. I actually liked Anthony Duclair's game, and obviously Mike Hoffman, as he's been proven goal scorer for many years. Didn't have a good season in Montreal last year, but he's a proven goal scorer.
Yeah, honestly, when I said that, I didn't mean in an offensive way,
Yeah.
because I think these guys are going to actually help this team, because this is a team that really didn't have many NHL players at certain points in the year. I'll be real, they were calling up guys from the minors who were barely passable as NHL players. And now they kind of got some guys that can game. I mean, we've seen Hoffman score 30 goals before. Zadina projects to be a 25, 30 goal scorer, potentially, if he can find his groove. And then Anthony Duclair, we've seen him play really well for Florida multiple years. So you know what? I think this actually could help their top 9 look a little bit more respectable. And then as well, I know it's not a true addition, once again, rookie kid coming up. I am most excited of all things for this team to watch William Eklund play. He's back from his injury this year, and he's probably playing the full season, and I think he could be a really big impact rookie.
Now let's talk about the biggest thing with this team, and that's a loss of Erik Karlsson. What do you think about that?
Absolutely massive loss, although very, very needed loss. The fact that they kind of held this guy for so long when they were clearly a rebuilding team was unfortunate. I think maybe they could have got a little bit more, but the fact that they got a bunch of picks for this guy is really solid. I mean, this guy was past 30. He just came off a career season, and obviously is one of the all-time great defensemen offensively that we'll ever see. Like, 100-point defensemen don't come around very often.
No, but you know what? Personally, I thought Mike Green made a terrific move moving that contract out. It was really to move that contract out and free up cap space. And I thought he did a terrific job doing that because he got assets and he got rid of the cap space. So with the way the San Jose Sharks are right now, there's no way they needed this player anyways.
Oh no, it would have been a complete waste for this team to just continue to hold on to him, pay him that money, and continuously be a bottom 5 team. They did the right thing to start rebuilding. Let's take a look at this new offense, though. I mean, when we talked about earlier, this top 9 offensively got a lot better. It's a lot deeper than it was before, absolutely. Clearly, there's a lot of gambles here taken by Mike Greer on this team. Like, guys like Duclair and Zadina, they're going to be guys who it's like, okay, show it to us. Show us that you have that extra gear. Show it that you can be a top 6 player. And I think that's going to be interesting this year to watch. Which of them, if either of them, can prove that they can be that 25, 30 goal scorer for this team that they desperately need on the wing.
Yeah, and I also like the other guys that they still have on the team for now, and that's Logan Couture, and they got Thomas Hertl on the team still. And if those guys still stay on this team and they're not traded, they're still going to be pretty competitive, actually.
Yeah, that'll be the question really for the Sharks this year. And I mean, don't get me wrong, if I'm a Sharks fan, I'm excited because I think the future is very bright. Like, you guys got guys like Will Smith you drafted this year, and William Eklund is one of my favorite young players out there. I think the future's bright for San Jose, but they might have to give up some of these players at the deadline. Guys like Logan Couture, Thomas Hertl might not be there by the end of the year.
Yeah, as Scott alluded to, the most exciting thing with this offensive core is definitely going to be that young rookie, William Eklund. We're going to see how he plays, how he gets implemented in the lineup. And I'm looking forward to guys like Zadina as well, seeing whether those guys can have a bounce-back season. And I really like the trade they made with the New Jersey Devils and getting that Zetterlund kid. I want to see how good this Zetterlund kids play on this team this year.
Yeah, definitely some good young players to watch here. Let's take a look at this defense, though. Overall, I'd say this is one of the worst defenses in the league. I think a lot of San Jose fans know it too. Not really an insult by any means. It's just, hey, they're a rebuilding team that's going to probably be bottom 5 this year. Without Erik Karlsson, there is a massive hole. They still got Marc-Edouard Vlasic here. This guy, no shame. This guy was absolutely elite, played for Team Canada multiple times, really solid defenseman back in his day, but unfortunately he is really old now and he is just not the same.
I like Ferrero. Ferrero is probably my favorite D-man back there now.
I think he is their best defenseman.
Yeah, probably the best D-man back there, but yeah, the fact that they have Marc-Edouard Vlasic on this team, blows my mind. Like, this guy is so
He's pretty
old.
close to retirement now.
And with such a high cap hit, but yeah, no. This defense core, as Scott alluded to, I just don't, it's probably bottom of the league here.
Let's move on to the goalies here. Obviously, still, right now, they got Kaapo Kähkönen from last year. This guy played a fair amount of games, kind of splitting with James Reimer there. Unfortunately, James Reimer is out of town now, but they did bring in Mackenzie Blackwood. Mackenzie Blackwood had a lot of potential. He was a guy that's looked upon after his rookie year to be one of the next up-and-coming young goalies. Unfortunately, he dealt with several injury issues over the next 2 years after that, and he kind of never materialized into what the New Jersey Devils expected. But this is another move kind of by Mike Greer. Take a shot at a guy for cheap and see if he turns out. Kind of like the Philip Zadina type thing. This guy's going to get a chance, and he might even be the starter this year. It's hard to say. But I look for these two goalies to likely split.
Yeah, Mackenzie Blackwood, I remember that rookie season. He was so good. But he really fell off the cliff with all those injuries there. Yeah. We'll see if he can play with all those nagging injuries, whether he's fully recovered or not. Capo Kekkonen was a very interesting goalie. I told Scott when that trade happened from the Minnesota Wild, I was very excited for the Sharks. I thought this was going to be a terrific goalie. But when he landed in this team, he was terrible. So, and I realized that he was playing really good in front of that very stacked Minnesota defense. So we'll see. This defense is still very, very thin. I don't think these two goalies are going to do very good on this team, but it is what it is.
Yeah, job's definitely up for grabs.
And the next team that we have is the Seattle Kraken. Now, I went to Seattle this year, and I like their arena. Their arena is really sick. Right beside Space Needle there, really cool. But let's talk about some of their additions. They added Brian Dumoulin from the Pittsburgh Penguins, who's a good defenseman, and they also added Yamamoto, who is a Seattle native. So it's going to be interesting to see how this team plays. They did lose a lot of players this year, including Carson Soucy. They also lost Morgan Geekie, Daniel Sprong. I mean, they lost some depth scoring for sure. We'll see how this team does, but I think Carson Soucy is a big one that they lost.
Yeah, easily the biggest loss for this team in this offseason was Carson Soucy. This is a guy, in my opinion, that was like their second or third best defenseman on this team last year. He really had a solid year, like all around. Kind of Vancouver's gained their loss. But looking at some of these other guys that they did bring in, Yamamoto, I think there's this thing, I don't know how to explain it, but whenever the Oilers let a player go, that player plays infinitely better for their new team. So I wouldn't be surprised if Yamamoto pops off for Seattle and contributes quite a bit. And then looking at guys that they added in, like Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, this guy is going to bring a real physical touch to this bottom line for this team. I mean, he's been on the pass with Vegas. He's got experience on a team that knows how to win. And I think that might provide some leadership for this team that's pretty young overall.
Now let's dive into the offense. As Scott alluded to about Yamamoto, I remember when this team traded for Eli Tovinen from the Nashville Predators. He had a horrible season for Nashville. He wasn't working out with Nashville, and they brought him over here, and he decided to pop off. So it can very well happen. They can, and especially Yamamoto is a Seattle native. He's from that Washington state. So I could see him have a lot of pride. I can see him being very motivated and excited to play for this team.
Yeah, no, there's something about when you play for your home city. You do tend to play a little bit harder. Jared McCann last year, wow, what a season. I don't know if I could ever imagine this guy being a 40-goal scorer, but this guy really took over for this offense. Along with Jordan Eberle, had a really solid year. Kind of like I said, any ex-Oilers that go to new teams, they tend to really have good seasons. Eberle is kind of proof of that. Like crazy, really good offensive season for him. And then Andre Burakovsky, kind of forgotten a lot, but I mean, this guy, before he got injured, just had such an insanely good year.
Yeah, Burakovsky, he missed a lot of the season last year, and we have to remember when he was playing for Colorado the previous year, how good he was on that team. And I thought when he was playing in Seattle as a top player, he was terrific until he got injured there. So yeah, that's going to be a big one. And obviously the other one that we don't really need to touch on too much is Matty Beniers. Matty Beniers, the big question is how would he do in the second year?
Yeah, Matty Beniers winning the Calder last year. I mean, what more can you ask for a first-year player? This guy really did it all. Tremendous puck mover. He's going to be a great two-way center for a very long time in this league and only develop to get better. I wouldn't be surprised if this guy is a point-per-game player in the future who is a perennial all-star.
So let's talk about their defense core here. They lost Carson Soucy, as we mentioned, but they added Dumoulin. So Dumoulin's going to be there filling up the role. He's projected to play with Justin Schultz. I could see that being a pretty good pairing, actually. An offensive D and a defensive D.
Yeah, speaking of offensive and defensive complement, last year, Vince Dunn and Adam Larson, what tremendous year these two had. Vince Dunn, career year by far. Really, really solid season offensively. I think a lot of people in St. Louis are really upset about this right now because they would have loved to have this guy back on their team right now with the way their defense is played. Just tremendous. Like, I hope he can keep it up because that was unreal. And then, of course, Adam Larson. I mean, this guy has got a lot of flack for a long time, being such a high draft pick years ago, but he really lives up to it in different ways. I mean, this guy is such a good shot blocker, like absolutely top 5 in the league. A really physical defenseman, and he's just always really solid. Even last year, like, he contributed points more than he usually ever has. I mean, just for Seattle, like, it was the perfect fit.
Yeah, and they also have Jamie Oleksiak back there, a big defenseman. Not the best, but he's a good third pairing defenseman. So yeah, we'll see how that goes with that team.
Yeah, overall a really good defensive core. Its only question really is how they're going to deal with the loss of Carson Soucy.
Yep.
Moving on to the goaltending. Philip Grubauer really impressed me a lot at times last year. I thought he was really solid in the playoffs. He pretty much single-handedly, it felt like, beat Colorado in that series. His numbers were absolutely outstanding, and it felt like a true bounce-back year for this guy. All right, let's move on to the Vancouver Canucks. This team was very busy this offseason. Like we just alluded to with Seattle, they went out and got Carson Soucy, which was a huge add for this team who has struggled mightily defensively over the last 2 or 3 seasons, along with Ian Cole. I mean, these two guys are really going to help because this team was dipping into the minors for the defense a lot last year, and I think their top 6 is starting to finally take shape.
Yeah, one of the biggest weakness with the Vancouver Canucks was definitely their D-core. I thought their D-core was extremely weak last year. You had Quinn Hughes, who was really the only good defenseman back there, and everyone else sucked. Let's be real. Everyone else sucked on that defense. So it's good that they added these 2 players that Scott mentioned, and on top of that, we cannot forget the Philip Hronek ad from last year as well. So technically, they got 3 new defensemen back there.
Yeah, it's wild. I think it's going to be a huge, huge help for this team who has not really ever struggled to score goals. It's been keeping the puck out of their own net, and these guys I think will add quite a bit. Along with adding a guy in Teddy Bluger who is shown to be a real good pest forechecker, a guy who's going to likely play for the third line for this team, can kind of do it all. Really gritty, can kill penalties if he needs to, got some decent speed. I mean, I think this is an ad that really good compliment because we already know Vancouver's got a good top 6 and can score goals. What they do is need to have good forecheckers and keep the puck out of their own net.
Yeah, now let's dive deeper into the offense. What do you think about their offense, actually?
I mean, overall, I think Vancouver's offense is solid. I mean, last year, Elias Pettersson, 100-point season, absolutely phenomenal. We called it. We predicted at the beginning of the year that he was going to be one of those players that absolutely exploded and had a career year, and he did. Not really shocked about that. Along with his line mate, Andrei Kuzmenko, coming from the KHL last year, absolutely, I think, blew expectations out of the water. Absolutely dominant game, almost a point per game player for his first year in the NHL.
Yeah, I was very impressed with Andrei Kuzmenko. I did not expect that type of production from him in his first year in the NHL. And good on Vancouver Canucks on getting that type of player. And he works really, really good with Elias Pettersson. But a player I'll be really watching this year is, I keep saying this over and over and over and over again because this guy, I expect him to pop off, and he never does. And it's Brock Besser. This guy really needs to really, really, really start to shine now because it's getting too late. This is probably his last chance, and he hasn't popped off, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's been on the trade rumor list for Vancouver for what it feels like 2 years now. He's really got to get back to that 35 goal scoring potential he used to have when he was young. As well as a guy I really want to watch this year for this offense is Anthony Beauvillier, who they got in a trade at the end of the year from the Islanders. He's kind of played a lot on the first line, or at least in the top 6, specifically when he was playing with Kuzmenko and Pettersson. I think he really needs to prove that he can play with the big boys and be that type of offensive player like he was drafted to be several years ago.
Yeah, and another thing I'll be really looking at with the Vancouver Canucks is their depth scoring. There's always been a problem with their depth scoring, in my opinion. Whether Vasily Podkolzin can actually take the next step.
Yeah.
I mean, he's projected to play the 4th line, which is not a good sign. So I don't know.
Yeah, players like Podkolzin are going to have to really step up if this team wants to have ambitions of making it to the playoffs. I think he can have a better season. I mean, he has a lot of potential. And I think these other guys like JT Miller, obviously we know what we're going to get from him. Pretty solid player, almost a lock for 85 points at this point in his career. So should be good for offensive of this team.
Now, the defense, as we mentioned, they got 3 new defensemen back there in Philip Hronek, Carson Soucy, and Ian Cole, which are going to really, really help this team. And on top of that, you had Quinn Hughes, who's their number 1 defenseman, who had 70-some point last year, and probably plus 20 from what I remember.
I want to talk quickly about Quinn Hughes here. For the longest time, I was really impressed with his offensive game, but I thought his defense kind of was crap. Last year absolutely changed that. His defensive game took a complete 180. He was really solid in his own zone. He was making good plays. He was back checking hard. He was fighting harder for pucks. He was not making turnovers that he used to make. I just really was proud of his two-way game last year.
Yeah, and a player that they lost back there is OEL. I think it's a good player that they lost back there. They did not need that player. I thought he wasn't very good for them, especially for that contract. So it's good that they were able to move his contract. Another player that I'll be looking for them to move throughout the season is Tyler Meyer. I feel like as good. I don't know. I feel like he's not a very good defenseman. He's a big defenseman who's overpaid.
Yeah, I feel like the one weakness for Vancouver right now, looking at their team more than anything, is going to be that third defensive pair. When you have guys like Tyler Myers and Christian Wolanin right now scheduled to be as their third pair, that's a little shaky. I'm hoping that the top four can log a lot of minutes for Vancouver's sake so they don't really get exposed. Tyler Myers, defensive liability at times, and Christian Wolanin, just not a lot of experience, not a really great NHL player. So I think they're going to maybe need to do something throughout this year to address that last pair.
Now let's look at their goaltending. Now this I really love. They went out and got Casey DeSmith. Now this is low-key a very good ad. I really like Casey DeSmith. I watched him in that playoff series when he played for Pittsburgh Penguins against the New York Rangers. He played terrific. But now having him as a backup is really good because remember when Thatcher Demko went down, they needed a backup goalie.
Yeah.
And now they got a good one.
And obviously with a guy like Thatcher Demko as your starting goalie, I mean, he's great. I don't know why he seems to get so much hate in the last year. This guy, me and Hohen both had as a top 10 goalie in the NHL before last year. Absolutely phenomenal 2 or 3 years before that. I'm not going to hold that one bad year against him. I think he's going to rebound. This poor guy had no defense in front of him. He is a solid goaltender, and I'm looking for him to have a huge bounce back this year and be pretty dominant between the pipes.
And the next team that we have, and finally, we have the Vegas Golden Knights. And congratulations to this team for winning the Stanley Cup. It was a very well-deserved cup. Now, let's talk about their addition. They added nothing. What they lost over the offseason, they lost to Riley Smith, which I think is a pretty big loss. I thought this guy is a good 25 goal scorer on this team. And they also lost Jonathan Quick, which is a big loss. They lost Phil Kessel. They lost Teddy Bluger. Yeah, to be honest, their loss is not too bad, with the exception of Riley Smith. So they pretty much have the same team as last year. This team is a very good team because they won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I mean, can't really argue it.
Yeah.
Absolutely dominant performance in that cup final. They kind of abused Florida. It was kind of ridiculous, scoring like average of like 6.5 goals a game in that series.
Yeah.
Pretty wild, especially against Bobrovsky. That was super impressive to watch, and one of the best performances I've seen from a team in a while was that cup final. Looking at their team, yeah, the biggest loss, Riley Smith. That's the only one I'm really worried about for this team and their chances to potentially make it back to the Final Four or repeat as cup champions. Riley Smith has been there since the inception of this team. He has been a solid player. He came in with that trifecta of Marchessault, Smith, and Carlson. And I really was a little surprised that that was the guy that was the casualty here. Riley Smith been known for being a really, really solid playoff performer. Last year, not necessarily as much as previous years, but he usually scores key goals, and just I was quite shocked by this.
Yeah, let's look further into their offensive depth. What do you think of their offense?
I mean, it's pretty much the same, so I still love it. This is still a really good team on paper and like in actuality, because we just saw them 4 months ago hoist the cup. They can score goals. I mean, Jack Eichel proved that he is not a bust in any way. He is dominant, and he was really looked upon badly by people, and they were all wrong. This guy is now a cup champion. He almost won cup MVP if it wasn't for his line mate, Jonathan Marchessault, who, once again, really solid offensive player, can score goals, very gritty, very physical. And obviously, leader like Mark Stone, I mean, who plays such good two-way hockey. This team has some really good stars.
Let's talk about what an ad that Barbashev trade was.
Oh, unreal.
Unreal. That guy legit solidified that chemistry with Jack Eichel. That's like the missing piece that Jack Eichel needed. And Vegas became cup contenders because of that trade.
Yeah, I really like the depth of this offense, actually, looking at the forward group. I mean, we've seen William Karlsson even play as low as the third line. And when you have a guy like that playing that low down the lineup and he can still contribute offensively like we saw in the playoffs where he was scoring goals at will, it's absolutely incredible. Obviously, you still got other guys too. Like, I mean, you got...
Chandler Stevenson.
And Brett Howden. Like, these guys contributed big moments, and it was just... Overall, this team is just stacked.
Yeah, just a deep team. Just like their defense. Now, let's talk about their defense, how deep it is. They have the same defense core.
I mean, I could argue this is the best defense in hockey.
Yeah.
You might not like that argument, but I mean, what we saw in the playoffs kind of, to me, solidified it. They made Adin Hill look like a superstar at times because the defense was so incredible. I mean, when your third pair is Whitecloud and Haig, I mean, that's an unreal third pair. And then, of course, up front, Pietrangelo, one of the best in the game for a long time now, and Shea Theodore. I mean, like, offensive defensemen like that to complement these other guys.
Yeah, and then don't forget Martinez. Martinez is like the leader in block and hits. Like
Every year
insane.
he leads in blocks.
He's
This
like,
guy has no fear.
yeah, like literally they got a mix of everything. Like they don't have like one type of defense. They got a type of defenseman for everything in their top six. It's unreal.
Yeah, and don't forget McNabb. I mean, that guy that guy will kill someone, man. He hits everything. Like, I don't know. I really like what they've done with this defensive core of 6 because there's no holes, and very, very few teams, if any, can say that they have no holes in the back end.
Finally, the goalies. Now they re-signed Adin Hill to a pretty lucrative contract there. $4 million, I believe, for 3 years. I guess he deserved it because he won the cup. So, yeah, I mean, now do I think he's a starting goaltender? Probably not. But you know what? He deserves it.
I mean, what's really nice about the situation is, sure, they did pay Adin Hill a lot more money. I'm sure it was mainly based off the playoff performance, winning a couple do that, but also having a young kid who was a rookie last year like Logan Thompson, who was the starter for much of the year, as like a guy who can split time with Adin Hill. I think this is actually a really solid one too. Once again, I don't really think this team has any glaring weaknesses, whether it's forwards, defense, or goaltending. This team is just pretty solid all the way through. All right, guys, we've kind of given you a preview for all these teams. Now we're going to go through our predictions on how we think these standings will fall. As you can see on the screen here, me and Hohen each have our own predictions. And beforehand, I swear we didn't talk about this. This is just how it ended. Almost everything the exact same, except for at the top, we have one switch between Vegas and the Oilers. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not super confident either way. I think these teams are both very, very close.
Yeah, the only reason why I don't have Vegas first is only because they're going to have a Stanley Cup hangover. I think they're not going to come out of the gate as quickly. They're not going to be as motivated as they were last year. Last year, they were come out really hungry. You know what I mean? Versus the Oilers, they look pissed. They look pissed from that loss to the Vegas Golden Knights last year. All the Oilers came to the practice facility in Rogers Place like literally the first day of September. That's how serious they were.
Yeah, no, I could see it going either way. The reason I have Vegas is just I really like this defense compared to the Oilers. I think that's a huge gap right there. I think that they're going to be able to keep teams to 1 or 2 goals allowed more games than Edmonton. I mean, Edmonton's going to be in a lot of shootouts. They always are. They're going to play a lot of 5-4, 5-3, 6-5 games, and that's pretty common for Edmonton. But I just think Vegas is more sustainable to get wins if they're going to win games 2-1, 3-1 at times, and I think that's going to be key.
Yeah, let's look further down the list. Why we agree on Kings and Vancouver being the way they are. Why do you feel like Vancouver going to make the playoffs?
Vancouver's the team I have switching here. I mean, last year we had the same 3. It was Edmonton, Vegas, and the Kings in the playoffs. Vancouver, I think, takes out Seattle this year. Big switch. Seattle last year had Carson Soucy. Now Vancouver has Carson Soucy. I think it does make a big difference. I'm not saying that's the only reason. Vancouver got new coaching halfway through the year, and they did have a better record in the second half. As well as I do think that Seattle's team kind of overachieved in a lot of areas last year. I'm not saying their team's bad by any means, but I think that some of these guys like McCann that were scoring at a 40-goal pace are going to take a step back and not score at that pace. And I really do trust in the core of guys like Elias Pettersson, Kuzmenko, and more star power to kind of keep that team going, along with Thatcher Demko in net more than a guy like, say, Philip Grubauer.
Yeah, I mean, we both are in agreement with that. I definitely see that Vancouver is going to be a better team than Seattle for sure. Seattle, to me, they definitely overachieved in a lot of ways last year. I don't see them replicating that at all. Now let's move down the list. I have Calgary just out of the playoffs. I feel like they're going to do better than last year for sure. I think especially their individual success with these certain players are going to be better than last year, especially Huberdeau. Huberdeau had a horrendous year last year. I expect him to get at least 80 points this upcoming season. Kadri, I expect him to get up at least 65 points this upcoming season. So I expect these production to go up for these players individually. Unfortunately, the team just not as deep, in my opinion, as a team like Vancouver.
Yeah, I think Vancouver's slightly better. At least I trust them a little bit more than Calgary because Calgary has a lot of changes. I do think Calgary will do a lot better this year, though. I can see so many of these players that as bounce-back candidates this year, like Hohen said. Huberdeau especially, like number 1, most of all, most talented guy on that team who should bounce back. And then I really think Markstrom won't be as bad. I can't possibly see him playing as bad as he did last year. And I think some of these young kids coming into this lineup, guys like maybe Coronado or guys like Jacob Pelletier, one of these guys is going to really work his way up the lineup and play pretty good hockey, I think. think. And I think that's going to be the difference to push the Flames up maybe 5 or 6 points in the standings from last year. I do think they actually have a legitimate shot as a wild card 2 team.
Yeah, now you look at the bottom 2 teams that we have. No surprise here. I think a lot of people either had the Sharks or the Ducks as the last 2 teams in the division. These 2 teams are clearly rebuilding. They're just testing out their young guys, giving the young guys some playing minutes. Yeah,
so I went back and forth on who I was going to have last year between San Jose and Anaheim a lot. In the end, I ended up with Anaheim over San Jose because I think a lot of these guys San Jose went to get, these veterans and guys who are trying to prove it, I think they're going to work a little bit harder. They have some experience in the league. Guys like I think Zadina and like Duclair especially, these 2 are going to try to work a little bit harder this year than maybe they have in the past. Get a real chance in maybe that top 6 role. And then guys like Hoffman, I know he's going to contribute. He's a veteran. He's been around. This guy's an automatic 25-goal scorer everywhere he goes. So I know he's going to contribute something to this team. And I still think guys like Thomas Hertl and Couture add a lot of value while they're there before they get traded in the first half of the season. And that's why I think they're going to put up more points than a young team in Anaheim.
Yeah, that's exactly why I have Sharks as well. I just feel like they got a lot more experience, and especially in the top 9 there. The forward group is much deeper than Anaheim, in my opinion. Anaheim did add Killorn, but overall, that team is very, very young. They're experimenting with a lot of things over there. And I just don't see Anaheim getting out of last place.
Well, that concludes our Pacific Division preview and predictions. Feel free to take a look at some of our other videos and look forward to our Central preview and predictions to be coming later on this week. Till then, take care and have a great day.
Take care, guys. Bye.